For you, the listeners of My JavaScript Story, Loot Crate is offering an opportunity to save 10% on any new subscription at lootcrate.com. Just enter the promo code BRIDGE10 for 10% savings. Loot Crate is one of my favorite things. Every month I get a box in the mail, costs less than $20, and it comes with all kinds of goodies. I have stuff from, just looking at my shelf, Batman, Spider-Man, Ninja Turtles, Back to the Future, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, and much, much more. So if you're a geek, a gamer, anything like that, and you want cool stuff to put around your office, cool t-shirts, comic books, etc., then definitely check out Loot Crate. To save 10% on your new subscription, go to lootcrate.com/Ruby. Again, that's lootcrate.com/Ruby to save 10% on any new subscription. Enter the promo code BRIDGE10 for 10% savings. Hey everybody, and welcome to another My JavaScript Story. This week we're talking to, is it Johannes Schickling?
Yes.
I always want to say Johannes, and I'm like, I think he's German. Anyway,
Exactly.
So do you want to just give a brief introduction to who you are? And I'll just put out there, too, that you were on episode 257 of JavaScript Jabber, came out April 11th, 2017, and we talked about GraphCool.
Awesome. Yeah, totally. So I'm excited to be here again. I'm Johannes Schickling. I'm the CEO and co-founder of GraphCool, which is a backend service, and we're now also working a lot on Prisma, which I think we will also talk about during this episode. I spend most of my time in Berlin and will actually relocate to the Bay Area pretty soon. So, and in general, I'm very excited about all kinds of open source technologies, which makes me even more excited to be here today.
Very cool. And GraphCool is an interesting technology, and we've seen quite an uptick in adoption with GraphQL. So I'm curious to see, how this all goes together with what's going on with GraphCool. But before we dive into that, let's go back to the very beginning. How did you get into programming?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's quite a while ago. So I guess there are multiple entry points for me there. Like one, I've been like in general just always been fascinated by technology, and like sort of found my way from like playing with Lego to Lego Mindstorms, I think. So sort of like in the first ways into programming this way, but then really got more into it from actually me spending quite a lot of time when I was like 13 or something like that in online gaming, that I was like always part of like competitive tournaments and being part of clans, which needed websites. And I ended up being the person who would build these websites. And at some point, I was just like spending way more time on building these websites and always obsessing about making them nicer compared to actually playing myself. So, and then at some point, like other people just noticed that, asked me whether I could do something for them. And so one thing kind of led to another. I got more and more away from designing myself versus building more and more complex things. Therefore, sort of like went from PHP together with HTML, CSS, dived a bit more into JavaScript, was then like sort of what must have been like early 2010. Really got started with building single page apps. Like that was like pre-Backbone 1.0, I think.
Oh, wow.
And
I remember those days.
So this was like when Require.js was just barely a thing, and was basically spending most of my hours just fighting circular dependencies and wrapping my mind around this, where like pretty much everybody on Stack Overflow said like, don't do this single page application thing. Nobody will ever adopt that. That's not going to be a thing. And I sort of took the leap of faith there, and stuck with it. And then sort of like also decided to like not render it server side, but actually deploy it on S3 and like build a REST API back then in PHP. Then sort of like made my way through Rails over to the Node ecosystem. At some point hopped like then so that was still all self-taught. At some point I then started computer science and math So spent quite a bit of time on like Haskell, Rust. Ultimately, I also spent a lot of time on mobile development, and then found my way back into full stack. That's sort of like describes sort of like the last decade of programming for me.
That makes sense. It's funny how many people I've talked to that, yeah, they're like, well, I got into gaming and I joined this clan and they needed a webmaster, and now here I am doing professional web development years later.
Yep, that's definitely not the first time I've also heard this from other people.
The broader case of that is I was in a position where such and such a group needed needed a website, and so I built it for them. And a lot of folks, I was working for a company and they needed a website, and so they decided blah blah blah, and I was interested, so I was the one that wound up being saddled with it. And and so yeah, it's a very, very common story, I think. And you can even broaden it out from there to, well, I was an entrepreneur and tried to build this thing, and now I'm a full-time developer. But
I think that is definitely also that's also a parallel story that actually fed into this, that I was just like getting more and more involved in, like for example, hosting my own events, since I was also spending a lot of time there, like as a DJ, where I also like started my my own side business this way. So there were a lot of different things that pulled me in, where all of this was the common denominator. So that's quite interesting.
Well, and I also think it speaks to the fact that we all are, well, I shouldn't generalize too much, but at the same time, most of the people I talk to, there's some aspect of, I had a problem, I solved a problem, and once I conquered it, I felt really good about it, that keeps people coming back to programming. And when they lose that at a job, they tend to move on. And so there's some aspect of human nature. I don't know that everybody has it everywhere, but certain people have it to a certain degree that keeps them in programming and keeps them excited about being part of the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are just like bonus points there, or like additional factors that make you just more attracted to it. So for example, I always like really enjoyed math and physics and so on, and just programming was just like such a nice medium to express that and make that really tangible. So that was always like a big point for me as well.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny too that you bring that up. It's like, oh, I was always good at math and physics, and so that applies. But again, I mean, different people have different backgrounds, and I've talked to a number of people where it was like, I was doing art, and then I got into design, and then I realized that I could make my design functional, and that's where they're in it for. And so it's fascinating just to see the breadth of experience across the programming field.
Right. What I've also seen a lot is like actually architects going into programming or into web development, because like for architects, the feedback cycles are so long that they just like get fed up that like whatever they come up with either never gets really implemented in the real world, and that they just get way more like the feedback cycle, and therefore the reward is way shorter, which really draws them into web development, where they can build something and actually people can use it, they can iterate on it, which I think is also a very common theme.
Yep, absolutely. So, you kind of talked your way around to web development and JavaScript. But at what point did you become a JavaScript developer? Like, how did you find JavaScript? Was it just in the course of doing web development, or was there something else that kind of pushed you that way?
I think the first website I've probably built, I think it was like pre-Dreamweaver. I think it was like with Microsoft Front Page, which was crazy. And then sort of like then I got like more and more familiar with this with HTML and CSS and JavaScript back then. Like JavaScript was super uncommon back then, and it was very unusual that you would use JavaScript to just manipulate what's going on. And this is where I found my way. And this is where I had at some point this mental switch that JavaScript should actually be the thing that builds the website for me and not the other way around. And so I sort of had like this very typical journey there from like just doing everything manually at some point using Moo tools, then moving over to jQuery, moving over to Backbone, moving over to Angular 1, moving over to React, and I'm still a big React believer. That was sort of my journey. I skipped Ember, and I'm still very happy with React, but I can understand that people have see a lot of appeal from Vue. But and all of that just describes really the front end angle to this. So and on the backend side, I'm not that strongly tied to Node. There, I'm typically picking whatever's best for the job. So whether that's being Go or Rust or like Ruby back in the days. So that sort of describes this angle.
I was going to say, in my experience, that's Rails. And then, I was going to give like a self-deprecating chuckle or something. But anyway, because I've been doing Rails forever and I love it. But yeah, whatever fits your mental paradigm of the problem you're solving and, makes sense, if it'll get the job done. I think a lot of times we get caught up in the whole ecosystem where it's, okay, well, I don't see why you'd use anything but Node for the back end of your app. And well, it turns out that you can do it with all kinds of different things. And if it makes you happy, I mean, for heaven's sake, stick with it. So yeah, so Rust or Go, that's interesting. I'll hear Go sometimes, but I don't typically hear Rust for a back end.
So I would say like Rust, not as much for web development yet, even though I was I was always very intrigued by Rust just because it's a beautiful language. It's probably a bit too heavy-handed since you have to think about memory management quite a lot, and it's like a completely different memory management model, like you would be used to from C or C++ or some other languages. But it's still it's surprising that actually, so Steve, Steve, he was very, very big in the Ruby community, and now he's moved over to Rust. And I think there are a lot of Rubyists moving over to Rust because it's very expressive. I just think that the ecosystem is not fully there yet. And there are a lot of experiments also to actually bring Rust to the front-end JavaScript ecosystem. So, so I think what you'll probably see over the next couple of years is really more and more the polyglot systems just get more and more natural, and the tooling will improve with things like Webpack supporting WebAssembly. I think that it will be a matter of time on when that will open doors for embracing polyglot systems more.
Yeah, I think we're seeing the first real systems being built on something that compiles to WebAssembly and actually works in any of the browsers. And I agree, over the next few years, having a target like WebAssembly that gives you more flexibility than what you can compile to JavaScript proper, I think that's going to change the game in a lot of ways. And if you like coding in a particular language on the back end, you're going to find some paradigm that is very similar and syntax is very similar that will work on the front end that compiles neatly to WebAssembly. I've seen some systems, like I said, I've been in the Ruby community forever. There's a system out there called Opal that compiles to JavaScript, but it has a few quirky things because it compiles to JavaScript. And I think WebAssembly will help obviate a lot of those issues so that it just, it's like you're writing basically real Ruby. And it'll just, WebAssembly will make a lot of those issues go away. I don't know if it'll get rid of all of them, but it'll make it much more approachable. So I love the idea that you're putting forward where it's like, okay, well, this is a Rust app, front end and back end.
Right. No, and I think there's a very interesting new component that people don't really see from this abstraction yet. But I think besides the thought about which programming language should I use, it's also with things like microservices and functions as a service, systems are being broken up into so many different smaller parts that makes it also easier to move between languages for different systems. And how you think about back in the days, you've been just thinking about your big Rails monolith, and you sort of slammed on new gems, whatever architectural challenge you would face. But I think nowadays you also have this new dimension. You think in terms of infrastructure components you can leverage. So you have like what the entire ecosystem that AWS provides you, like where you would I don't fully know it anymore, like what the Rails equivalent was for like message queues, but for in AWS you can use Kinesis or SQS and so on. So that allows you to partially write a lot less code and build these systems in a different way, which I think is a new way of thinking for a lot of developers that just were used to building monolithic systems before.
Yeah, I agree. This is a show about you. I love getting your opinions, but I do want to get back to your story. So what was it then that drew you into doing JavaScript and in particular these single page apps? Because I still talk to people that are resisting the single page app movement. And I think there are reasons for that. And I think that some of the reasons are great and some of the reasons don't really, pan out if you really dig into the reasons, behind the reasons. But for you, what was it about single page apps that really appealed to you?
Typically try to, when I'm starting a new project, I typically try to really well understand what are some, if I'm making certain decisions, how long lasting are these decisions? So when I was starting with the Laravel system, I was really facing this long lasting decision on that I maintain the flexibility on long term, being able to switch out certain components without the need to refactor and rebuild everything. And this was already where like introducing certain layers of abstractions and good interfaces was a very appealing thought for me. So this is where this was really the first big movement of separating from the front end from the back end. So that was a very natural thought for me, where it took this leap of faith where this wasn't really a proven thing yet. So this would have still meant that you could just build everything front end on the front end with jQuery, and you just make it less rich. But the idea of a single page application for me made a lot of sense. From that perspective, that I want to build a rich user experience, and I was always sort of approaching every product that I've built from a design first perspective. And the best way how I could really implement that is like I didn't want to create too much work for myself, and if I would have needed to implement that with jQuery, that would have created a lot of work for me. So this is why I took the step to go with Backbone, and later I saw Angular as a good step forward, and ultimately went with React.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you mentioned, a design first perspective. And yeah, I mean, with these systems, if you're building a single page app, you don't even have to care what your back end is initially, because you can build your entire interface without it and hard code some data in and see how it interacts, and then go from there.
Exactly. But it was still a very interesting decision for me to face back then, since there was like everybody who you would ask was basically saying, don't do single page applications. There was no positive reference yet of like where this is being done successfully. And you'd sort of like try to make sense of this on your own, that this makes sense. So that was a very interesting thought experiment, which paid out. And for me, it's like I see the exact same thing right now happening with people moving from REST to GraphQL. That like, there you had one big success story, which was Facebook, but it was the same thing. Besides that like 2 years ago, nobody was kind of like really sure whether that's the right thing to do or not. And really now all of these success stories appear, and it becomes clear for people that this is the right step.
Yep, that totally makes sense. So what have you done in JavaScript that you're really proud of?
Okay, so I think we have to look at this from like from a year perspective. Oh gosh, from the Backbone days, I don't even fully remember anymore. I think there were like a couple of Backbone plugins that I've written back then, or like before then, even a couple of jQuery plugins. I've always like there were always like a couple of missing spots that I tried to fill with some libraries that I've created along the way. Some of them I made open source back then, which were just now still get issues created for packages I've created like 7 years ago. It was like, so brings up artifacts like. Do you remember the days where you would use Bower.js as package management?
Yep.
And like it's crazy how many people are still using all of that. So
yeah, but
I think
works, right? I mean, that's the idea, or at least for me, that's the idea. It works, and so yeah, why not? But
some of the things that are more recent and more recent that I've created in the JavaScript ecosystem. One of which we've created last year, which was Chromeless. I'm not sure whether you've seen that. I think it was actually one of the fastest growing GitHub projects ever. I think in the course of the first 24 or 48 hours, I think we got like 8,000 stars or something, which was quite nice. So what Chromeless basically allows you to do is running integration tests on AWS Lambda in a serverless environment. And what Headless Chrome sort of allows you to do is run that in a headless environment. And we figured out a way how we could run that on AWS Lambda, which means you can scale it out horizontally. So that's something I'm really proud of, since that saved us a ton of work, and also like it seems like a ton of companies are adopting it at this point. Let me see. So I'd sort of really have to go to my to my own GitHub profile to really to really go back in time what we sort of created. I mean we're working on a lot of open source tooling at GraphCool, and so all of that is obviously very related to GraphQL. So some of the recent ones are like GraphQL bindings or GraphQL Yoga, which is a really simple way to create a GraphQL server. So yeah. So one other one I think that's like still heavily used is like I've written like a plugin once for Gulp, like the build system Gulp, and I think that's sort of like still being like downloaded I think a million times per month or something like that, which is crazy to see like how the peak of adoption is really like lags behind on like what sort of the when people are excited about the technology.
Yep. Yeah, totally. So you've mentioned GraphCool a few times in GraphQL. I think that's probably the thing that, at least when I talk to people, you're the best known for. Do you want to kind of give us just a brief origin story of GraphCool, the project? I don't know exactly how you think about it. So
yeah, sure. So basically the origin story was that I was just I just sold actually my previous company where we've been building a VR camera app, and I was sort of responsible for most of the infrastructure and building the actual app, and I was also building a backend there, and I was kind of frustrated that I was spending so much of my time sort of reinventing the wheel over and over again, of building a backend that's kind of trivial but still needs like so much manual work. Like you need to write SQL migrations, you need to build like an API that maps your API to your database, until you finally can get to the point where you can implement your business logic and work on the actual product. So I've been through that process like so many times. I've been burned by the same things over and over again. For example, like really falling in love with the API of an ORM, and ultimately just to realize that this ORM was a trap and doesn't withstand doesn't withstand the performance requirements of a production app and so on. So and ultimately that just means that you that you have to do a lot of things manually. And this is where, so I've just sold this company, and finally had a lot of time again to look into new technologies, and GraphQL was one of them. And GraphQL really, for me, showed the right abstraction of how you can build APIs and backends in a better way. And then I was basically thinking of like, how can I make this technology? How can I build something for myself that makes it really easy for me to build these backends,
Right.
and also for other people and for like people that are freelancing, some of my friends. So basically, I sat down within a weekend, built like the first prototype of what later would become GraphCool, a backend as a service based on GraphQL. So then like started showing this to friends. One of my friends actually told me he built the same thing 2 months ago. So he just booked a plane ticket, flew over to London where he was living back then. And that's like ended up becoming my co-founder. And since then, we've basically been working on this together, like throughout the scope of like 9 months or so. Kept working on it, onboarded hundreds of developers to the platform, had helped more and more people use it, until it really grew to the backend service that it's nowadays.
Nice. So what are you working on now?
Right. So we've had quite an exciting journey over the last year. We're always trying to listen to our customers and developers to see what makes their life harder than it needs to be, where are some of the limitations that they're facing, and how can we build a better system that improves that. So going back, for example, to this ORM analogy, where I said that you're falling victim to nice to the wrong promises of an ORM. This is something where I think an ORM provides to you a leaky abstraction, and we're always trying to like that the abstractions that we provide to you are non-leaky and you can rely on them. In the same way as React provides to you a non-leaky abstraction over the DOM.
Uh-huh.
So you've like there are very, very few cases where React is not powerful enough to let you do with the DOM what you want to do. And it's the same way that we think about backend development, especially focused on the data layer. So so gathered all of the user feedback that we had over over the last year. We've really taken a huge step forward by refactoring a core part of GraphCool, the GraphQL backend service, which is really this data mapping layer that maps a database to a GraphQL API. So we've extracted that core out and made it available as a standalone component that's called Prisma. And so that's what we've released, what we've open sourced at the beginning of January. And that's one of the core things that we're focusing on at the moment, with really the goal being that we'll be supporting every kind of database there are, so that you get a GraphQL API for any kind of database, and eventually actually a GraphQL API in front of multiple databases at the same time. And yeah, so with our big dream that you can use GraphQL to talk to any kind of database.
That's awesome. And I can tell you, I mean, I've tried using the Ruby abstraction for GraphQL, and it's kind of painful. I'll just admit it, right? Because it's essentially this other layer that was based, I think, on the Relay API setup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's just, it doesn't feel native, or I want to say it doesn't feel right, but that's not exactly what I mean. In Ruby, it's not natural. And so the way that those have been structured and the way that it works out, it just doesn't quite jive. And so it's been kind of interesting to go, oh, okay, well, maybe something like Prisma, where it's, hey, look, we're going to help you map over your database. You're not going to have to do a bunch of extra work to, resolve all the things to all the right place. I mean, that's really, really appealing to me.
Right. Yeah. So this is where we're basically trying to see, okay, when you're building a GraphQL server, where are you doing most of the work that like, and a specific type of work that we call stupid monkey work. So
I love that. I think I'm going to keep
like,
it.
So basically, like very manual mapping that you do from the database to an API, where whenever you change something, like you need to touch at least 3 kinds of files, and you're almost guaranteed to make a mistake.
Yep.
I think everybody who's built a backend has been there. And so we're trying to like really make that part of building GraphQL servers super easy, this data mapping part, and getting you like boosting you forward to the point where you just want to build, where you just want to implement your business logic, where you just want to implement your like however like your checkout process is built.
Yeah.
But this data mapping, that you get a nice abstraction. So I always draw the comparison from like the same way as React provides to you a great abstraction over DOM. And nowadays, web developers don't need to learn all of like the native DOM APIs anymore. You're learning the component model of React, or you're learning how Vue works. That just raises the abstraction. And we think about the working with databases and working with data in general in the same way that we are providing an abstraction layer that leverages GraphQL.
That's really great. So it sounds like, in a lot of ways, this could kind of overtake GraphCool in adoption, because, I mean, ultimately, I'm not one that always uses a platform as a service or something like that, but I could definitely see the appeal of, something that can just connect to the database that I'm already using and make it work that way.
For example, front-end developers can still using the backend service to sort of get off the ground. But as they mature in terms of like how complex the backend is that they're building, they can sort of move more to a component-based architecture and still get the same benefits they got out of GraphCool.
Yep. That's really cool. So the last part of this show is picks. Do you have some things that you want to shout out about?
Do you run your own freelance business? Or maybe you're thinking about picking up some business on the side? Well, then you need FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the quickest and easiest way to get invoices out to your clients. It's easy to use. It works anywhere, available from any device, on the desktop, iPhone, iPad, Android, and all of your data is backed up and secure. And it makes it really easy to get organized and get paid. You'll be tracking time, logging expenses, and invoicing your clients in no time. You can also save time billing, freeing up several days per month to focus on the work that you love, and you get paid faster. FreshBooks customers are paid on average 5 days faster because there's a link on the invoice that says "Pay me now." And it's a great way to grow your business. Plus, FreshBooks is offering a 30-day trial. That's right, 30-day trial if you try them out. So go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Once again, for a 30-day trial, go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section.
So some of the things that I'm really excited about is just in general how Gatsby is just picking up so much speed at the moment, and how easy it makes it to build static websites. And I think Gatsby is leveraging GraphQL in a really, really smart way that you cannot just like say in the same way as you're using like Jekyll, that you can just say, here are my static files and build my website from it. But with Gatsby, you can actually like use any kind of data source as a mean to build your static websites, which I think is fantastic. And that really opens the door for other services like GraphCMS, for example. So that's something I'm super excited about. Also from the GraphQL ecosystem, we're spending a bit of time right now preparing the GraphQL Europe conference, which will be in June this year in Berlin. So we're super excited to have around 500 attendees this year. And something else that we will announce also shortly is that we do a smaller conference also in April in Amsterdam this year. which is called GraphQL Day. We have people over like Ken Wheeler, who some of the folks of this podcast might know, and like a speaker from Apollo. So if you're either in Amsterdam in April or in Berlin in June, definitely come and see us at these conferences.
Awesome. And if people want to follow you and see what you're working on in particular, is there a good place for them to do that?
Sure. So I think I'm the most active on Twitter. So you can just find me like _ Schickling, like just my last name, or at GraphCool for GraphCool related things. I think that's the best way to keep up to date. Or if you want to learn more about GraphQL in general, maybe just check out our blog. That's like blog.graph.cool.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to jump in here with a few picks of my own. So the first pick I have, I don't even know what these things are called. I got it at NG Atlanta. But it's one of those phone holder things that you glue to the back of your phone. And anyway, I'm really, really liking it. It just makes it really easy for me to hold onto my phone. And so I'm going to pick it. It's round, and it kind of pops in and out. I'll try and... I don't know if you can hear me playing with it here right next to my mic. But anyway, so those are nice, and I've really been liking it. And what's funny is the part that had the company's logo on it popped out, and I lost it in the airport on the way home. So I don't even know who gave it to me. So go figure. One other pick that I have, when I was at NG Atlanta, since I mentioned it before, I did interviews with a lot of the speakers and some of the sponsors and other folks who were at the conference. And so if you're interested in that, if you go to devchat.tv/YouTube, I have a playlist there of the NG Atlanta interviews, and we talked about all kinds of stuff. The conference was somewhat diversity focused, and so some of the talks or some of the people I talked to mostly about Angular. So like I talked to Brad Green about what's coming up in Angular and things like that. And then I also talked to a number of people who were there talking about diversity. And so if you're interested in some of those conversations, anyway, some of them were really interesting. And just to give you a little bit of flavor there, I'm one of those people who, I want to see everybody have an equal opportunity, but I'm not convinced that the ways that people approach diversity are necessarily constructive. And so I tend to have a difference of opinion with most people regarding the topic. And so, we came at that with that perspective with a lot of these people that are very pro-diversity. And so all of the conversations were civil. I feel like we really came to understand each other better. And so I think these are more constructive conversations about, in particular, women in tech was most of the focus. But there are other aspects of it as well that come up. And, I think more conversations like that are what's called for if we really want to understand our tech community and what we can really do to make a difference. So, yeah, I'm just going to put those out there. There's no like head-to-head arguing. It's really just kind of coming to understand one another, and I think that's what's important in a lot of this. So anyway, go check out those videos if you're interested in Angular or in diversity in tech. And those are my picks. Johannes, thank you so much for coming and talking to us. I'm just going to encourage everybody to go check out Prisma. Is there a webpage where people can go get more information?
That's prismagraphql.com, or just like Google Prisma GitHub or Prisma GraphQL. I think the GitHub repository is a good place to start our website. There's also like a lot of people have created YouTube tutorials and YouTube videos explaining and like diving a bit into what Prisma is. So I think if you're too lazy to get your hands dirty yourself, this is like a good passive way to kind of like get a feeling for it until you're convinced. Yep.
Makes sense. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you for coming, Johannes.
It was a pleasure to be here.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.